Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the HR Congress podcast for today. My name is Ben Churchhouse, and I'm joined by Shane Cragun, the CEO and founding principal of SweetmanCragun Group, a global leadership development firm. Shane's writing, client work, and keynotes focus on leadership, disruption, strategy, and change. Shane has a detailed understanding of the digital age and how individuals, teams, and organizations can achieve excellence in tumultuous times. He is also the co-author of Re-Invention, Accelerating Results in the Age of Disruption. And Shane will be joining us at the HR Congress this year in Nice and presenting two sessions, a masterclass entitled Reinvention, Accelerating Results in the Age of Disruption, and a track session in the organization and leadership track entitled Leadership 3.0 or 3.0, whatever you want to call that, winning in times of uncertainty. So thank you for joining me, Shane. It's a pleasure to have you with me this morning.
Thank you, Ben.
Awesome. So I want to really jump into a general question to start with, because I think it's usually the best way to get to know the subject and to know you a little bit more. Obviously, you talk quite a lot about change and you work obviously a lot in that area. One of the things that I've always noticed, and most people will notice, that no one really likes to change. They don't really like to be forced to do something or to have to change course in any direction. It often goes against the grain of what's comfortable and what's familiar. But at this moment of change, or the process of change, is often the genesis of great moments of creation and development of new ideas and so forth. So in your experience, can people learn to love change, given that it often really wrenches apart the comfort and familiarity of their life?
That is a fantastic question. I mean, let's just be honest. We all have experiences. There are some people that just love change more than others. There are some who just love to disrupt the status quo. And there are others that are more comfortable doing the same thing for a long period of time. I mean, even in my situation, I'm sort of a laggard when it comes to technology. I admit it. But I think, Ben, what we hope in this age of disruption is that we get everyone to appreciate the need for change. I may not love it, but if I can get my team to appreciate the need for change, then we've won. I don't know if you'll ever get everyone just, I can't wait to disrupt the status quo when I get to work today. But what we can do is get everyone on the team to say, listen, if we don't change, we die. And we've all got to share a part. I'm willing to be part of this team, and I'm willing to be open to change, and I'm willing to contribute, in the best way that I can.
Yeah, so it's almost like an aesthetic appreciation of change in a way, being open to that concept rather than necessarily enjoying the actual disruption. Because I don't think anyone actually enjoys that. Maybe there are some people out there who do, but actually, well, for certain there are some people out there who do. But yeah, I think just having that understanding of appreciating the background of why change is necessary and adaptation is necessary is something which kind of will sit on shaky ground for some people, but nonetheless be important.
Yeah, and I think if you look at companies, Ben, when I visited Apple Computer the other day in Silicon Valley, their new big spaceship campus, and I can guarantee you, not everyone walking around that campus loves to change, but I can guarantee you they all appreciate change and they're willing to move when they need to move. I think that's what we want, right? We want people to appreciate change, appreciate the need to be part of a team that's changing. I just may not lead that change. I may be following anxiously someone that just loves to disrupt the status quo, and I appreciate that person. But that's not me, naturally.
And do you think this has got something to do with the way change is changing? It's kind of obviously a bit of a weird concept, but if we imagine, say, in the 80s and 90s, there was this sort of idea that change was a process, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, like a planned structure. There was a definite start and a finish point. Obviously, we know that change continues on after a certain project endpoint or whatever. But today, it seems like, especially in the business world, it is a constant adaptive process. It is constantly evolving and mutating and augmenting itself so that every day every second is a part of the change process. Do you think this factors into a little bit of that uncertainty around disruption? Because obviously, I don't have the experience of the business world working in the past, being relatively young, but I assume it was a relatively constant process. The change was a constant thing, but with a defined endpoint. Nowadays, there's no defined endpoint. There's just the process.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. In fact, what's interesting is I cut my teeth in Silicon Valley after graduate school. This was the early 90s. And there was a tech company I worked for. And we did a 3-year change process. And, and one, it's kind of funny to think about. And the San Francisco Examiner gave us the Change Company of the Year. We had 3 years. You're not going to get 3 months these days, right? So yeah, you said it right. And I think there's not many people out there that's been under a rock that hasn't noticed quickly that if I don't up my game and change, I might be out of a job. In fact, in America, there's a lot of, I'd say most people have been laid off at least once. And that's created a real felt need to get back on the horse and change, right? So in the 80s and 90s, a lot of people could just slide by. I don't think there's a lot of people right now that know that or that believe that. I think most people are ready to help change. I think there's an education around the fact that of the digital age, the disruptive age. Geez, I mean, if anybody reads throughout the day, they can't but read 2 or 3 articles a day about the importance of changing fast. So I think there's an awareness, and I think there's very little people these days that are going to dig their heels in.
Moving on from that point, I notice that there are still, though, a lot of people and organizations that may fall into a complacency trap. Not necessarily that they don't understand the need for constant change and evolution, but just that the actions don't really reflect the intent, perhaps. And I've read in some of your work that a leader or a leader accelerator is the force multiplier behind organizations keeping ahead of the curve and evolving. So if this is sort of common knowledge that we need leader accelerators, that we need change, we need to adapt, why do some organizations still continue to make errors or fall behind?
If we go back to the research, and we put this in our book, Re-Invention, that will be the talk. We say that the number one reason people or organizations don't change is a lack of felt need for change. In other words, they just don't have a need. They don't realize what they're up against, and they don't have this urgency to change. And so I think that when we say people are complacent and they don't change, there's just not a felt need for change. And in chapter 2 of our book, Reinvention, we actually asked the question, why don't people change? Why don't organizations change? And we came up with 6 deadly blindfolds. And probably the first one is arrogance. And I would say that's an underlying theme of all 6. So why don't people change? Well, it's because they have a sense of arrogance. Listen, we're Intel, we've always been king of the jungle. No one's going to overtake us. And so if we want to get out of the complacency, sometimes we have to help our teams understand the urgent need for change. And once they internalize that, all systems are go. So I would say that's the thing. Also, Ben, another interesting sort of new thing that's happening is busyness. People are so busy that it can seem like they're complacent. No, they're not complacent. They're just so busy trying to keep their job and make their quarterly numbers that it can seem like complacency, when in fact it's just very, very busy people trying to hang on by their fingernails.
That's a very interesting point, because we had a speaker at last year's HR Congress, Deborah Rowland, who made the point that sometimes to move forward, you have to be still first and reflect. And I feel perhaps as a condition of modernity of the societies and the economies that we've built, it really is predicated on speed, quickness, adaptation, fast, moving, don't stop. And there's of course a time and a place for that, but I do wonder if people are actually able, generally speaking, to stop and reflect and think about what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, the outcomes that they're looking for, the process. And I think that's a very important part of change, is reflection. So maybe you could just speak to that a little bit about the need for quiet and stillness and reflection, which isn't implying non-activity. It's just a part of the process which is perhaps not often thought about.
Yeah. I would say that, Ben, one way to think about it is that there's what we call strategic work and then operational work. And strategic work is what a leader does. Operational work is what a manager does. A leader decides what wall to climb, right? And then a manager helps you climb that wall, puts the ladder there, etc. And so when we say that leaders are really busy, that often says that they're focused on operational work. Does that make sense? In other words, if they're focused on strategic work, naturally there's lots of strategic questions, there's pondering, reflection, we're brainstorming about marketplaces, etc. But too often leaders, in their need to get quarterly earnings and to make the short term, dive too deep into the weeds. And therefore they're very busy in things they shouldn't be part of. So I would say if we were going to have leaders try to free up time, we would help them get back into the true nature of leadership work, which is direction setting and putting the architecture in place, etc. And if they stay there, they'll have time to think.
That makes sense, of course. And I want to pivot just now onto HR a little bit. If we're talking about developing an internal capacity for change, especially within an organizational context, how is HR to assist, or how can HR assist in this task more specifically?
One thing HR can't do is pretend they're the experts of, engineering, design, and things like that. What they can do is, here's the first thing I would say. If I look at the clients I've had and those that I would say have had really good HR leaders, those HR leaders are willing to ask the tough questions in meetings. So, for example, let's say a team is talking about, new product innovation. The HR leader could actually say, can I ask a question here? Why are we even talking about this? It's outside of our core competency. Can I challenge our conversation right now? Or the HR leader can say, can I challenge? I really don't think our structure is in place to make that happen. We would probably need to reinvent ourselves. So the first thing an HR leader can do is be willing to ask the tough questions and to interject into conversations and to become a strategic friend in terms of being a check. So if I'm other leaders, I'm like, I really appreciate that HR leader because they're bold enough to never let us get off track. They're going to call us on the carpet on tough strategic questions. The second thing I would say is that any organization that is a great organization of change obviously has a lot of executive sessions where they're working strategic issues. I think HR organizations can add a tremendous value by having a cache of facilitators that can facilitate those conversations. So, it's going to be hard to change if I'm part of the person that made the change. But if I could call the HR team and have someone come in and facilitate a discussion and really facilitate that, well, that's high value add. So I'd say two things, Ben. One is, how can HR help lead change? One is they can ask tough questions and hold people accountable to doing the right thing. And two is maybe provide resources to help them have these tough conversations.
If we're all going to be disrupted or about to be disrupted or in the process of being disrupted due to any number of changes, how is the direct employee experience going to reflect and evolve to show the kind of world that we live in? How is the employee experience going to change to reflect this process of constant evolution?
So I'll turn that just a little bit. Let's say this. There's a principle in today's digital age that if you don't have A players, you don't even have a chance to compete. You've got to have A players and A employees and A leaders. In other words, you've got to have the best. And you can only have the best if you have a great employee experience. And when I think of employee experience, I think about the life cycle of the employee, right? Which is attraction, onboarding, training development, performance management, and even offboarding. So to me, it's table stakes, right? Las Vegas, go to Las Vegas. I can't even play the game without putting up $5,000 table stakes. Table stakes are just having a great cachet of employees and leaders. Without that, you have no chance. And we've got to have a great employee experience to keep our people.
I think these days the waters have been getting a little muddied with the idea of employee experience, just in the sense that it can mean a certain number of different things to different people. But the need for the best talent, the need for the best internal organizational systems to nurture that talent, really ensuring that the people are looked after and developed in the way that's going to help the organization succeed, is really fundamentally what it's all about. I think what we're really going to see is the rise of employee experience as a talent currency. As the war for talent continues to expand, employee experience will be the thing that sets those organizations at the top and at the very top apart.
Can I give you an example? Is that okay?
Of course, yeah.
So I'm a fan of Apple, not just their products, but their culture. And, I'm in Silicon Valley 4 or 5 times a year, and I visit Google, LinkedIn, and Apple, and you name it, Symantec, and Juniper Networks, and VMware, and all these groups. But Apple, I'll tell you, there's just a buzz on that. I mean, you can just feel it. You can just feel the energy. And so anyway, so they have just built this new, you need to go to Google Images and look at it. Type in Apple's new campus. It looks like a big spaceship. It's just the most amazing thing I've ever seen and experienced. So there's a new strategic HR leader there, and he invited me in, and the excitement. So the first thing is we met, and he's like, "What do you want for lunch?" And I said, and I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. He goes, because we need to put it in right now. And I said, well, what are the options? And he got his app out, and he had an app for the employee lunchroom. And he says, well, today is this and this and this. And I said, I'll take this. He pressed it. 3 minutes later, we walk into the lunchroom. We walk into the hot food area, and he says, my name is whatever. And they had the 2 ready to go. And he was just so proud. He was just like, I mean, I've never, he was just like blown away. And I'm thinking to myself, he's not leaving. And he's telling all of his friends, right? Like, he loves this. Well, that's why Apple has some of the best talent. And it's little things like that. And that is the employee experience. So that's an example. And boy, I go to Google and these other places, lunchrooms are great. Energy is great. Apple is just a whole different, level of excitement.
That is, of course, fascinating. But my first initial reaction, to be a bit of a contrarian, would be, okay, how is this going to be applicable for the vast majority of other people in the workforce who aren't working at Apple or Google or some tech unicorn?
Well, I think that, but we can all say, yeah, and that's a good question, right? Because not everyone has all this money. But I think that if you and I had a company, we could make it, okay, so one of my business partners works at WorkLife here in London, work.life. And it's a place that she goes to, she has a home office, but sometimes she just wants to go around and hang around people. She'll say things like, Thursday's pizza day, and today, this vendor's coming in and we're all going to gather and okay, pizza day, big deal. But it creates a buzz. And then Monday is beer day. And then, this next Monday, someone that has a startup on microbrew is going to bring their brew in. I think there's a lot, if we just say to ourselves, what can we do to create an experience that's just really fun to be around? I think we can do it. Even if we don't have Apple's resources, right? Too many people just are clock in, clock out managers, and they don't get it.
As technological changes that are happening in the fourth industrial revolution continue to increase in speed, because let's face it, they basically are, leaders are going to be all the more important in effectively guiding their organizations to succeed and, of course, to help the people within them. How can leaders effectively play their part in guiding organizations through this uncertainty, through this moment of, well, not moment, but era of change?
I would say there's a couple of things. Number one, the leader has to make it safe for the team to speak up. I mean, can you imagine an organization changing where everyone feels the leadership should be worshipped and you never voice an opinion? So the first thing would be that I'm part of a team and my boss makes it totally safe to question, to disrupt the status quo. I think that a leader has to model the change, right? So the leader has to I mean, let's just think about it, Ben. If we said, who's the leader we love to follow that we're always safe with? It's one that's carving the path. It's one that's not accepting the status quo. It's one that's leading the company innovation. It's one that's going for the big play. It's the one that's creating excitement. It's the one that's making it safe for me to voice a different opinion. I would say probably safety and modeling are the two things that would be very important.
I wanted to finish off with a question which I read I can't remember whether an article or a LinkedIn post of yours regarding mental health. And mental health is one thing that is becoming a little bit more heralded in the business world, given that there is so much change, disruption. We've got social media, new technologies, politics seeping into everything. With this pace of change and all the noise that surrounds it, what can HR and business leaders do to help those in their organizations with their mental well-being, and particularly regarding the change process?
I'm really glad you asked that. That's something that I haven't been asked. You know, one of the things that I'm seeing from best-in-class companies, especially companies that win the Fortune Best Places to Work award, is actually a lot of their leaders are trained in meditation and run meditation sessions after work hours. And they actually run it for their teams. So you wouldn't believe this, but there's actually a lot of teams that will stay after work hours or come in on a Saturday morning, and their manager, their boss, is running a meditation session right there. Gee, symbolically, that's pretty amazing, right? So I would think that if we're working together, let's say you're the boss and I'm the employee, if you notice that I'm struggling, boy, having a conversation and saying, what can we do to get you in a role right now that would make it, that would really allow you to make things happen. So maybe flexibility, maybe listening, a listening ear. I'll tell you, I helped write a chapter of a book out of Harvard on mental health, and it's still a tough situation because, you know, the way things work, people are so pressured to make results. But then also I have to be very caring for that person that's in a key role about their mental health. I don't think anyone's cracked the code. Maybe it starts with listening and understanding that mental health can be an issue and being flexible about how that person does their work, who they work with, you know, something like that. I mean, I'm not an expert, but those are my thoughts.
I have seen some instances of new approaches to giving employees maybe digital detox time off, or, you know, forest bathing when they go out into the woods and just get away from technology for a little bit. Not specifically due to technology, but also just due to, you know, the work and the grind and the daily hassle. So I think it's going to be something which becomes much more of an integral part of the workplaces of the future, and probably appropriately so, because I think it's been neglected. It's a sort of a silent thing. You don't see it. It's not really visible unless there's obvious manifestations of burnout or some other mental health issues. It's really something that people can quietly suffer with, and they don't have to.
Yeah. So one of the things that you could, so if you said, how would we judge if a leader is a good leader or not? One of the things we can say that they're not is if they're surprised when a key employee leaves. That right there is an implication, right? If they've got a player employee that surprises them and leaves, that tells me a lot. Tells me there's no safety in the guy talking about his or her dissatisfaction. It talks about power distance. I mean, there's a lot of things, right? So, you know, I think the discussion part, you're safe to go to. I can tell you I'm struggling with my marriage or what have you. And so I think safety is an important thing.
So to wrap things up, you'll be presenting a session in the organization leadership track at the HR Congress and a masterclass both on day one of the event in Nice this year. What can attendees expect from those sessions?
Well, let's start with the masterclass. The masterclass is focused on our first book, 2016, on Re-Invention. And if people are interested in how to make change happen quick and in big ways, how to pivot quickly, how to actually enjoy disruption. We talk about disruption coming in like waves from the ocean, and you want to learn how to ride it back when it's a ripple versus waiting to be crushed on this. If you want to know how to sense when change is coming, how to actually ride disruption, how to actually use disruption as a way to leapfrog competition. If you want to learn about why organizations don't change, the 6 deadly blindfolds, this is all about being an excellent change leader. And so that's the master class. The organizational leadership track is going to talk about the new research we just concluded. We just did 2 years of global research, 40 countries, 40 industries. We asked the question, is there new leadership needed? And the answer is a loud yes. And we've actually preliminarily identified 5 new master leadership skills that we believe will separate the winners and losers in the age of disruption, the digital age. We believe that the world needs a leadership upgrade, that we are not teaching the right leadership skills and competencies to lead effectively in this new age. Governments need new leadership. Organizations need new leadership. So that will be showing the initial results of our research, our initial model, what we feel are the 5 master leadership skills that will make all the difference.
And if people want to get in contact with you, listeners to the podcast, how can they do so?
Email Shane@SweetmanCragun.com. SHANE@SweetmanCragun.com. And I will be very responsive and really look forward to being at HR Congress. It's a real pleasure to have been asked to be there. And I hope that the things that we provide there will be helpful.